All right. So we have been looking at prophecy lately. We've made our way through Daniel, and we've got up to Revelation. It's important to keep just sort of quickly recapping these things so that it settles. The recaps get shorter and faster, though, as we try to fit more and more in the other side. So very quickly, in Daniel, we heard about the statue. It had different metals and different parts, and of course, the legs were of iron and the feet were of iron and clay. Also, in Daniel, we heard about a dream where there were 4 different beasts, and at the last beast, the 4th one was terrible. So the legs and the feet of that statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and the great and terrible beast in Daniel's dream, they correspond to the same empire, and that was the Roman Empire. Okay, the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire goes roughly, probably ascended maybe about 60 BC or thereabouts, was the major kind of battle where it was thought, when we look back in history now, that the Romans really sort of had taken over from the Greeks, from the Greek empires. Of course, we're still in the time of the Roman Empire. So there's about 2,000 years there that is covered by the legs in that dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and the beast in that dream that Daniel had. Okay, as you can see there, the kingdom of iron, the gospel age. It's not really examined in Daniel, though, unlike the empires that came before it, but it is examined in Revelation. So that's what Revelation is primarily concerned with. The Christian church and also the political and social happenings, particularly as concerning the children of Israel and their descendants, during the last 2,000 years, the Roman age, the kingdom of iron age. And it does that primarily through the 7 seals vision, which goes from chapter 4 through to chapter 19. Of course, Revelation takes us through to the revelation, the revealing of Jesus Christ himself at his second coming. That, of course, will be the final downfall of the kingdom of iron, mystery Babylon, spiritual Babylon. It'll be the end of the church and gospel age, at least as we know it. And also the 7 seals vision in Revelation, which starts in chapter 4, takes us through to about chapter 19. That's what it takes us up to, Christ's return. There's a few more chapters of Revelation after that. They're pretty exciting ones too, but that's after the 7 seals vision. So we've been looking at the 7 seals. Of course, remembering the whole point of the Revelation is that we're moving through scene after scene, era after era, major event after major event, to get to the revelation of Jesus Christ. You look at Revelation chapter 5, and it says there in verse 1, "And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals." So we're in the throne room of God, a throne room of the kingdom of heaven, and John sees this scroll, and it's got 7 seals on it. And I'm guessing the first one probably right there, at the very start of the scroll. And then maybe as that one gets loose, there might be another one placed somewhere in there to stop the scroll being opened further, and so on. And as those seals get opened, more and more of the scroll can be revealed. Revelation 5, verse 6, "And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders," all these creatures and people that were there in the vision in the throne room, "stood a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent forth into all the earth." So we've got the Lamb of God there. It's Jesus Christ, of course. "And he came and took the book," or the scroll, "out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne." So Christ takes it from God. You can read that in Revelation 1, verse 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to Jesus Christ to reveal unto his servants. And so here in a vision, we see that actually happening, I suppose, is that the one that sat on the throne, God, gave it to the Lamb. "This is yours to open." And he is the one who has the authority to open. So the revelation came straight out of heaven, right? Delivered straight from heaven to Jesus Christ, to us. That's where it's come from. That's its source. There's a fair amount of authority in that. In Revelation 6, verse 1, it says, "And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals." So he's opened the first seal there, and we went through this in the last presentation. The series of visions begins from that point. And you can see there in verse 2, "And I saw and behold a white horse," and so on. So John starts to see different visions as each of these 7 seals is opened, and Christ reveals more and more of the vision of the coming, at least from John's point of view, 2,000 years. The eras and events that would take place from John's time right up until our time. And as each seal is opened, it brings a vision with it. And the vision corresponds to an event or an era. And it does so in chronological order. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We got through 6 seals in the last presentation. That takes us through to the end of chapter 6. And we also covered a little bit of chapter 7. So we've got some way to go. But when the 7th seal is opened, and we're going to get into more detail on that today, that brings a series of trumpets. Now, the trumpets that are up there are those round old ones, not the ones that Louis Armstrong used to play, right? And the old war trumpets, right? They get blown, but it's the same deal. When a trumpet gets blown in the vision, a new event or era is shown to John in symbolic kind of way. It uses creatures, it uses people, it uses mountains and fire and rivers and blood and all sorts of things, right? It's quite vivid. But what it represents is an event or an era that occurs, right? And the trumpets get sounded 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, through chapter 8 and chapter 9. And I think the 7th one is actually sounded in chapter 11, right? They all get sounded. And then as the 7th trumpet gets sounded, we get in the 7th trumpet 7 vials or bowls full of the wrath of God that are poured out. And again, as a bowl is poured out, it's a vision that John sees that represents a certain event again. Now, each of these is in chronological order. So the first seal happened first. The second seal came after that. The third one after that, and so on. Get to the 7th seal, and the first trumpet occurs. Well, that's after the 6th seal. The second trumpet is after the first trumpet, and so on. I think you get the idea by now. Some of the events, this is a bit more of a traditional timeline. You can see down the bottom there, 100 AD through to 2000 AD and a little bit beyond, of course, as we are now. And up in the top, the very first little block there, that green one that says it has a 1 next to it, that's roughly how long the event that is represented by the first seal went for. It's about 80 years. All right. And that, if you recall, that was the golden age of Rome. All right. The white horse. You can see that some of those events go for quite a long time, like the 5th and the 6th trumpet. Some of them are very, very short, like the first trumpet, the 5th seal, the first vial, and so on. Some of them overlap. Some of them continue on while the next one happens and then disappears. And we'll see an example of that while we're looking at some of these trumpets. But nevertheless, they're in chronological order in terms of the time that they begin. And they are the major events and eras that happen from John's time through to our time and even up to the return of Jesus Christ, which is sometime in the next few years. Make no mistake about it. It's coming. All right. That's what this revelation covers for us. It's the time of the Iron Kingdom, as represented in Daniel. It's the time of the great terrible beast, again, as represented in Daniel. That's what Revelation is concerned with. And it shows John, who kind of picked up the baton from Daniel, what was going to happen during the time of that kingdom of iron, during that beast kingdom. We, just a point of interest, are in the time of the 7th vial. That's right down there, the one in red. Okay, red, alarm, alarm, you know, danger, danger, Will Robinson. After that, Jesus Christ returns. That's where we are. So once again, if none of this sticks, and there'll be names and years and emperors and tribes and all sorts of things thrown around today, if none of it sticks, know this. We're at the end of the vision. We're at the end of the 7 seals vision. And after that, when we finally get there in about another 53 presentations, at the end of that, Christ returns. That's where we are today. Remember that. So we looked at the 7 seals. The white horse was the golden age of Rome. The red horse was civil war within the Roman Empire, commencing around 180 AD. The black horse was oppressive taxation. Of course, taxes raised, a great burden put on the people to raise money to wage those civil wars. The result of civil war and the oppression and so on led to the pale horse, which was famine and pestilence, and further war and the barbarian incursions on the borders of the Roman Empire, and death. That's why the horse is pale. Those 4 seals, the 4 horses, bring us approximately up to about 300 AD. The fifth seal was the altar and souls of the martyrs, which was the intense period of persecution, 10 years of it in particular, under Emperor Diocletian from 303 to 313 AD, persecution of the Christian church. The sixth seal had two parts, the earthquake and the eclipse, which was the overthrow of paganism. All the pagan gods like Jupiter and Saturn and Juno and all the rest of them, right, completely overthrown as Christianity rose to political power. Not the best thing for Christianity, because from there it very quickly became corrupted as people became Christians for political expedience. Nevertheless, the earthquake and the eclipse, time of great upheaval. Historians write about it as an absolute wonder that a system of paganism that had stood for so long could so quickly be overthrown during the time of Emperor Constantine and moving on through the next decades up to the reign of Emperor Theodosius, which is the Roman version of Theodore. I'm pretty sure anyway. Maybe I made that up. You can check it later, Theodosius. Now, it also is part of the sixth seal, the 144,000 are sealed. The true church, not that there's literally 144,000 in the true church. There's probably a lot more than that over the time of the church age, but it's just a representation, a particular number that represents the true church. They were sealed and they were put into the background as the corrupted Christianity, paganism creeping back into the church, paganized Christianity came to the forefront. The true church was sort of put into the background a bit. Now, while that's happening, as you can read there in Revelation 7, in fact, we might just read Revelation 7, verse 1. And after these things, that is after those first six seals, I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. So as we come up to the seventh seal, we've got this picture of the four angels and the four winds of heaven, sort of representative of that whatever was going to come upon the whole known sort of earth, the whole part that this next bit of the Revelation is concerned with, right? All corners of it. They're holding this tempest back. They're holding it back, holding it back. There's a storm coming, buddy. As the quote goes from Night at the Museum or whatever it was, there's a storm coming. And the angels are holding it back until the true church is safe, put into the wilderness. Okay, so that's where we got up to. Brings us up to about 380 AD, the reign of Emperor Theodore. Slide 7. So the seventh seal is about to be broken. Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. In prophetic terms, it's not very long. Emperor Theodosius actually tried to appease a lot of the barbarians, the Goths, and the various other related tribes. And so there was a little bit of a more sort of restful period during Theodosius's reign. But shortly after he died, very shortly, the barbarians organized themselves and attacked very shortly thereafter. And we'll go into all of that in a minute. Verse 2, during this time, up in heaven, and I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets, trumpets for war. They're ready to sound. In verse 6, and the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The tempest that's being held back is ready to be unleashed now. Whatever's coming, whatever's just sort of been held back is now decreed, okay, when that first trumpet goes, here it comes. The storm's about to unleash. Those seven trumpets maybe sort of echo for us the fall of Jericho. That was heralded by trumpets as well. And what happened with the fall of Jericho was the children of Israel marched into the promised land. And I suppose as the seven trumpets of Revelation sound, the seventh one encompassing all of the vials as well, they precede our entrance into Christ's kingdom, the stone kingdom that came and smashed the statue in Daniel. A lot of the symbols, or in fact all of them, have a precursor in the Old Testament, and there's keys all through the Old Testament as to how to interpret the symbols in Revelation. So here they are, ready to sound. Now, just before we get into what these trumpets might be, it's important to understand a little bit about the Roman Empire as it was at the time of Emperor Theodosius. All of that green area was the empire. During his reign, at his death, it split into two parts, although there's more than two parts up there. The green became what became known as the Western Roman Empire. The yellow bit became known as the Eastern Roman Empire. That bit there in orange was actually the little bit of land that was given to the Goths, the barbarians, to live in for a short time, attempts to appease them, and so on. I think it's called the Illyrian Prefecture. It was nominally part of the Eastern Roman Empire, but it was kind of like this third part, just for a short time, that was given to the Goths. That's what Theodosius did. He tried to sort of appease them and have them sort of have some land and live in peacefulness instead of constantly attacking and making incursions all around the borders and trying to bring the Roman Empire down. So what we've got there, don't worry about the pink bit for a minute. What we've got there now is the Roman Empire in three parts at the death, or just after the death of Emperor Theodosius. It's important to understand they're in three parts, because as we read on in chapter 8, quite a few of the verses will refer to the third part. The third part. And what they're referring to is the Western Roman Empire, the bit in green. The whole of the six trumpets concern the entire fall of imperial Rome. But the first four trumpets are specifically to do with the West, the green, okay? That's why it often says in these coming verses that we're going to read the third part. That's what it's talking about, the green bit. It would only take about 100 years. That's why the trumpets only go through about like half of chapter 8. Some of the other parts, like the fifth and sixth trumpet, they go for a couple of chapters, much longer events. But the first four trumpets, they indicate events that would happen that would bring down the Western Roman Empire. The green bit would only take about 100 years. Papal Rome actually rose out of the ashes of the West, but the prophecy doesn't really cover that until later on in Revelation. Trumpets 5 and 6 cover the east part. We're not going to look at them today. That takes a lot longer. I might move on. For those, if you don't understand this slide, that's fine, but some a bit more sort of pictorially minded than others. At AD 1, as you can see there on the timeline, roughly when the Roman Empire started, those legs of iron, okay? The prophecy of Revelation covers through the first six seals up to about 380 AD. As you can see, it splits into east and west there. Now, on the western sort of leg, if you like, you get about another 100 years of grey there before it kind of turns brown and grey. That's what the first four trumpets are going to cover. Then with trumpet 5 and 6, it actually swings around to the east and it covers off on the end of the Eastern Roman Empire. Okay? Like I say, if that confuses you, erase it from your mind. Let's go into the trumpets. The first one is a storm of hail. The second one is a volcano that gets thrown into the sea. The third one is a meteor that flashes through the sky, falls down to the earth. And the fourth one is an eclipse of the heavenly bodies. Like I said, it's half of chapter 8, and it's our subject for today, concerns the demise of Western Rome. The fifth and sixth trumpet, you can see there, locusts from the bottomless pit, myriads of horsemen. That'll be the subject of the next presentation. That's the demise of Eastern Rome. It takes about 1,000 years. We won't get into that today. So the storm is being held back. And what comes with the trumpets has been described like this by some historians. If a man were called to fix upon the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most calamitous and afflicted, he would, without hesitation, name that which elapsed from the death of Theodosius the Great to the establishment of the Lombards in Italy. That's about 380 AD, or a little after, to about the mid-500s AD. Most of that is the time that we're going to look at. What this person's saying is, if you had to pick the most horrible time in history, that was it. When people lived in the worst possible fear, and conditions and calamity and atrocity, that 100 or so years is it. That's what we're going to look at. That's the storm that's being held back by the angels. It's about to be unleashed on the Western Roman Empire. So let's see what happens. First trumpet, 8 verse. You read with not out loud. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire, mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. So the tempest has now been unleashed, and fittingly, it's a storm of hail and fire mingled with blood. It doesn't take much imagination to see what this is talking about, the destruction that it wreaks. The trees, the grass, all burnt up. Fire, blood, killing, war, invasion. It's talking about the invasion of the Goths. Those are the wrong Goths. There we go. That's better. There were various tribes sort of loosely referred to as the Goths or the barbarians, but the one that's probably the most important were the Visigoths. They were led by a man called Alaric. They sacked Rome in 3 days in 410 AD. In fact, a quote from Edward Gibbon, one of the most preeminent historians about the Roman Empire. At the hour of midnight, the Salarian gate was silently opened. That was a gate into Rome. And the inhabitants were awakened by the tremendous sound of the Gothic trumpet. Edward Gibbon was an atheist, I understand. And yet, unwittingly, probably, he uses the same language as the Bible. For the very first trumpet, he writes about how Rome was awakened by the sound of the Gothic trumpet, and so it was. The Goths invaded. And as I said, in 3 days, they completely sacked Rome, killed all these people, stole all their stuff, and so on. It's a hailstorm. Hail often comes from the north. In Europe, the Goths in the empire, mostly from, they left destruction in their path. I'll just read this one to you. This even before the Goths had actually entered Rome. They were already sweeping down through parts of the Roman Empire. Whether fate led them or the heavy anger of the gods planning disaster upon disaster, from that day, whithersoever the Furies have driven those errant bands, they have poured pell-mell over remote lands, over every obstacle, like a storm of hail or a pestilence. Again, a historian who probably had no idea what was written in Revelation, using the same imagery as the book of Revelation uses for this particular event, a storm of hail sweeping in over the land. Historians, others describe their ravaging, their destruction, the smoking ruin they left behind, how peace and plenty and the most fertile and populous provinces became deserts. So they did a good job of what they were supposed to do, the Goths. Well described and prophesied by the Bible there. Third part being that Western Roman Empire of trees burnt up, all green grass burnt up. Let's read on. Revelation 8, verse 8. And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. So whereas the first trumpet was directed against the earth, the second trumpet is directed against the sea. It gives us a good clue as to where this next calamity is going to take place. What this is talking about is the invasion of another tribe called the Vandals. It's actually their work, their body of work is where we get the word vandalism, right? Pointless destruction of stuff. Usually these days perpetrated by teenagers and 20-somethings. Back then, perpetrated by the Vandals against the Western Roman Empire. They actually, the Vandals as a tribe had sort of settled in Spain, where they were sort of kept under the thumb a little bit by the Roman Empire under a leader called Genseric or Gaiseric, same word, same two different words, but same person. They broke out of Spain and invaded northern Africa, which was part of the Western Roman Empire. Through the 430s AD, they took Carthage, one of the major cities there, and probably the point from which they leapt off into the Mediterranean Sea there. In 439 AD, and they just pillaged and ransacked all of the coastal areas of the Western Mediterranean, through Italy, through southern France, through Spain, all the islands, Sardinia and Corsica and Sicily and so on. They occupied some of those. There was, as the scripture says, blood, fire, ships lost, great loss of life through this time. Much of the Roman navy was destroyed in various battles throughout these years. The Vandals actually used fire ships to great effect. And maybe the sort of piece de resistance for the Vandals was that they again sacked Rome in 455 AD, about 40 years after the Goths did it the first time. They did it for 14 days. Perhaps that's why we call vandalism and not Gothism. Pope Leo, who was the Pope at the time, apparently requested that Genseric abstain from murder and destruction by fire and be content merely with pillaging, in an attempt to sort of appeal to his softer side. Another quote from a historian: the eruption of the Vandals. That's the words that are used, the eruption. Remember, this is a volcano here that is being pictured, being thrown into the sea. The eruption of the Vandals, the successors to the Goths, and equal claimants with them as to the extent of the share they separately held in the destruction of the Roman Empire, forced its way like the slow but terrific eruption of a volcano. Description again from secular history, perfectly reflecting what the scriptures in roughly 96 AD say to us. In that area, the Western Mediterranean, particularly that coast there of Italy and the islands around it, there are actually a lot of volcanoes. As it turns out, that one there is Mount Etna on the island of Sicily. In 472 AD, probably at the very height of the Vandal sort of terror in this area, Mount Vesuvius, right next to Naples, had a massive eruption. I like how the Lord sometimes marries, the earthly with what he has said will happen, just as an extra little signpost here and there. I tried to get some figures on how many volcanoes are in this part of Italy. There's anywhere from 20 to 40, depending on how you count them. Some of them under the sea, many of them along the land, many of them now dormant. 4 pretty major ones that are still going strongly, like Mount Etna. Let's look at Revelation 8, verse 10. So that was the second trumpet. Now we get the third. And the third angel sounded, verse 10, and the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, which is an indication of bitterness. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Okay, so there's reference to the waters. It's talking about the rivers through the Western Roman Empire. It's talking about wormwood, great bitterness. We've got this image there of a star falling from heaven, burning like a lamp, like a meteor streaking through the sky and hitting the earth with a crash. This is referring to the invasion of the Huns. Who here has ever heard of Attila the Hun? Yes. Who here of Alaric? Okay, much less hands. Who ever has heard of Genseric the Vandal? Okay, even less. But who's heard of Attila the Hun? Okay, a lot more. All right. This, as it turns out, this particular trumpet, the events in it, is given a name. Now, the name here is Wormwood, but it's interesting that out of all of these, the most popular, infamous maybe, that we even know of today, 1600 years later, is still Attila the Hun. Maybe the fact this one was given a name was an indication of just how infamous this one would be. Now, unlike the Vandals, which went for, 30, 40, 50 years, this happened in the space of 2 years, 451 to 452 AD. Attila, which is a cuddly kind of name, actually, not sort of at all concomitant with what he perpetrated on the Western Roman Empire. And his Huns came in through Europe, Germany, France, the places that we know as those places today, sacked many of the major cities like Worms and Cologne and whatever else is up there. I think Paris was saved, but saved for later, maybe. And then they actually finally got repulsed. The way that they got in to Europe was via the great rivers of Europe. Hence why it's talking about the third part of the rivers. I wonder if I've got that on the next slide. Do I? No, I've got a torch. That's it. So they came in mostly via the river system. They eventually got turned back after their supply lines grew so long and so on. And they went back and they tried a second time, and they came into the Alpine area in Italy, as the scripture says, the fountains of waters. And in fact, in the scripture there, at the end of verse 10, it's even got it in the order that Attila did his work in. Firstly, via the rivers into Germany and France, not repulsed. Secondly, into the Alpine area, the fountains of the waters, where all the rivers flow from. Unlike the slow sort of lava flow of the Vandals, Attila the Hun had a swift and bitter effect, as suggested by that meteor. It was quick, was bright, was powerful, it was unparalleled in cruelty. Towns were wiped off the map. Some places, the reports were you couldn't even see where this town was. There was confusion over the site of where that town used to stand. Large cities were invaded and pillaged. He had a massive army for the day. The populace was killed and tortured. Massive tributes were imposed. Attila himself humbly named himself the Scourge of God. He was purported to enjoy the terror that he inflicted on people. What else have I got here? The stars described in verse 10 as burning, as it were, a lamp. The other little picture up there is a fire torch. Bears a little bit of a resemblance, perhaps, to a meteor streaking through the sky. They were probably a very common sight during the rampages of the Huns as well. Attila died in 453 AD, the year after the 2 years of terror he inflicted upon Western Europe. And the terror and fear that he inflicted was remarkable. In a time when there's no texts or emails or satellite communications or anything like that, everyone in the Western Roman Empire knew the name Attila the Hun, and it scared them to death. And just as quickly as he appeared, he disappeared, just like a meteor. Amazingly, in 451 AD, Halley's Comet was passing overhead. And during some of the battles, or the lulls in the battles, they observed it passing overhead. Again, just another little signpost. God knows what he's talking about. It is as he's ordained it. Revelation 8, verse 12. And the fourth angel sounded. This is the fourth trumpet now. And the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. So as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Here we have the description of an eclipse, not just of the sun, but of the moon, of the stars as well, the whole third part of heavens. Now, if you remember back to the sixth seal, similar sort of event happened, and what it symbolized was the closing out of that particular type of government, of those governing bodies. And in this trumpet, it's a very, very similar thing. That's what happened. This represents the final extinction of the Western Roman Empire. After the incursion of the Goths, after the incursion of the Vandals, after Attila the Hun did what he did, and there were various other lesser tribes that invaded Rome and did their damage and so on, death by 1,000 cuts over roughly that 100-year period. Finally, it just kind of closed out, and no one really sort of took any notice in the end. A guy from the Heruli tribe, maybe they should have been called the unruly tribe. His name was Odoacer. He deposed Emperor Romulus Augustus in 476 AD. When did we start all of this? Around about 395 AD. We haven't even covered 100 years, and the Western Roman Empire, the third part, has finally been extinguished. It's interesting that the final emperor of Rome was named Romulus Augustus. Romulus was the mythical founder of Rome. And in fact, Rome is named after Romulus. Rome the Great, the eternal city. Augustus was the very first emperor of Rome. So here's Rome and its emperors closed out, finally. The sun, the moon, the stars, the governing bodies, the government as it was, the emperor himself, the Senate, dissolved. Odoacer became king, self-described, and he subscribed the Western Roman Empire to the rule of the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople, and that was that. Thus ended the Western Roman Empire. The various barbarians, as a little bit of a side note, probably accepting the Huns, were quite possibly the descendants of the Israeli tribes migrating through Europe during from their Assyrian captivity. many centuries before. Jeremiah 51 verse 20 says to Jacob and to Israel, "Thou art my battle axe and weapons of war, for with thee will I break in pieces the nations, and with thee will I destroy kingdoms." Interesting thought. History has labelled the time that began from here up to around about the mid-1400s as the Dark Ages. Here's another historian. The world's midnight began in 476 AD when the triumph of Odoacer in Italy put an end to the Roman Empire. It lasted until the Turks took Constantinople in 1453 and the Ottoman power supplanted that of the Eastern Empire. The Dark Ages, when intellect was in eclipse, are usually held to include the period from the time of Odoacer until the 13th century. Again, using language very similar to what's here in the scriptures. The Western Roman Empire was eclipsed. It closed. Within the decades and centuries that followed, the social and political foundations of what we know today as Europe would be laid in its place. So that's trumpet 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're not going to look at the others today. They concern the eclipse of the Western Roman Empire. Let's read verse 13 of Revelation, chapter 8. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. The fifth and the sixth and the seventh trumpet, which encompasses all of the seven vials, are described as woe trumpets, W-O-E, but maybe the W-H-O-A as well. Whoa, trumpets. The fifth and sixth trumpets take up chapters 9, 10, and half of 11. They cover about 1,000 years. The seventh trumpet has a flashback and background of the rise of papal Rome, the reappearance of the Spirit-filled church, and then takes us into the seven vials. So, like I said, in about 53 presentations' time, we'll get there. But that, friends, is another story for another time.